5 years ago, Julia's life changed forever. It was the night of the accident. Her fiancé, Raphael, never made it home. The car crash that killed him shattered her world, leaving her haunted not just by grief, but by a lingering sense of guilt. For 5 years, she tried to move on. She moved to a new town, started a new job, and even met new people. But no matter how hard she tried to forget, Raphael's memory clung to her like a shadow that wouldn't fade. Now, 5 years later, the shadows are back. And this time, they're not just memories. It all started when Julia received a letter. She didn't recognize the handwriting, but the message chilled her to the bone. "Meet me at the bridge, just like we planned." It was signed with Raphael's name. Her hands trembled as she read the note over and over. How could this be? Raphael was dead. In the days that followed, Julia tried to convince herself it was a cruel joke. Perhaps someone had learned about her tragic past and thought it would be funny to torment her. But when she returned home from work one evening, she found something even more disturbing. On her kitchen table sat Raphael's favorite book, a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, open to a passage they used to read together. The pages fluttered as though moved by an unseen hand. At first, Julia tried to ignore it, but strange occurrences became more frequent. She would hear footsteps in the hallway late at night, the soft sound of breathing when she was alone in her apartment, and a cold breeze that swept through her bedroom even when the windows were closed. It was as though Raphael's presence was lingering, watching her from the shadows. One night, she awoke to the sound of someone whispering her name. It was soft, almost indistinguishable, but it sent shivers down her spine. She bolted upright in bed, her heart racing. The room was pitch black, but she could feel a presence, something cold and heavy lingering in the air. "Raphael?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The silence that followed was deafening, but in her heart, she knew. She knew that Raphael was not gone. Not completely. The next morning, she received another letter. This time, it wasn't an invitation but a warning. "You promised you'd never leave me. Now, it's my turn to keep that promise." Julia's hands shook as she crumpled the note. This had to stop. She couldn't live like this, constantly looking over her shoulder, terrified of the past. She decided to visit the bridge where Raphael had died, hoping that confronting the location of the tragedy would bring her some peace. As she approached the bridge at dusk, the air grew colder. The wind howled through the trees, and the sky was a deep, blood-red hue, casting an eerie glow over the water. Julia's heart pounded as she stepped onto the bridge, the wooden planks creaking beneath her feet. "I'm here," she whispered, her breath forming a white cloud in the air. "What do you want from me?" The wind died down suddenly, and the silence was suffocating. A chill crept up her spine as she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching from behind. She spun around, expecting to see someone or something, but the bridge was empty. The only sound was her own rapid breathing. "Raphael," she called out, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. "Please stop this. You're gone. You're dead. Let me move on." But the response she received was not what she expected. From the shadows at the edge of the bridge, a figure emerged. Tall, gaunt, and shrouded in darkness, it walked towards her with slow, deliberate steps. As the figure drew closer, the details became clearer, too clear. It was Raphael, but not the way she remembered him. His once warm eyes were now cold and hollow, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. He wore the same clothes he had on the night of the accident, torn and stained with blood. "You promised," he said, his voice a low, guttural growl that sent a wave of nausea through her. "You said you'd always be with me." Julia backed away, her mind racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. She had to wake up from this nightmare. But as she stumbled backward, her foot caught on the edge of the bridge, and she fell hard onto the wooden planks. Raphael, or whatever was left of him, continued to advance. "You can't leave me, Julia. You won't leave me." Tears streamed down her face as she scrambled to her feet. "I'm sorry, Raphael. I'm so sorry, but you're gone. I have to let you go." He stopped just inches from her, his cold breath brushing against her face. "I'll never let you go," he whispered. Without thinking, Julia bolted past him, her heart hammering in her chest as she sprinted towards the other side of the bridge. But just as she reached the end, something cold and unseen grabbed her wrist, pulling her back with a force she couldn't fight. She screamed, struggling against the invisible grip, but it was no use. The last thing she saw was Raphael's twisted face, grinning with satisfaction as darkness consumed her. Julia's body was found days later, lying at the edge of the riverbank. The official cause of death was drowning, but the locals whispered of something darker, something more sinister. They said her face was frozen in terror, her eyes wide as though she had seen something far worse than death itself. The letters stopped after that, but the bridge remained a place of fear, a place where the past refused to stay buried. Some say that on quiet nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear her voice calling out from the shadows, forever trapped in the grip of a love that refused to die.